The thing about a cruise ship is that you can't run very far. I keep coming back to that. Sitting here now in this windowless crew cabin on deck 2, writing this by the pale glow of a battery-powered lantern, I keep circling that truth like a drain. You can sprint down every corridor, climb every stairwell, seal every bulkhead door from here to the bow, but you're still floating on a steel island in the middle of the Atlantic. And whatever is on this ship with you isn't going anywhere either. Welcome to our new channel. We share intense zombie story videos here. If you enjoy the stories, join our family by subscribing. You won't want to miss what's coming next. My name is Joel Maddox. I'm 34. 6 weeks ago, I was a sous chef at a mid-tier hotel restaurant in Fort Lauderdale. I had a lease on a one-bedroom apartment, a cat named Otis, and a prescription for sertraline that I kept forgetting to refill. I was ordinary in every dimension that matters. And now I'm the last person I know for certain is still human aboard the MS Celestine, a 114,000-ton cruise liner that departed Miami on January 11th, carrying 4,216 passengers and 1,897 crew members. I don't know today's date. I think it's been 9 days. I should start at the beginning. I wasn't a passenger. I was part of a last-minute kitchen crew replacement. 3 of us brought on 48 hours before departure because a norovirus scare had wiped out half the galley staff. Me, a line cook named Daria Volkov from St. Petersburg, who barely spoke English but moved through a kitchen like water through pipe. And a pastry chef called Reggie Owens, a big man from Baton Rouge with forearms like bowling pins and a laugh that filled any room he entered. The first 2 days were normal. More than normal. They were good. The Celestine was beautiful in the way only something designed entirely for pleasure can be. 14 decks of polished brass and engineered happiness. The grand atrium rose 5 stories through the center of the ship, a cathedral of glass elevators and cascading chandeliers. The pool deck gleamed under a Caribbean sun. Passengers drifted between buffets and bars with the glazed contentment of people who'd paid to forget their lives for a week. I worked 16-hour shifts and didn't care. The kitchen was enormous, organized, well-stocked. Daria and I fell into an easy rhythm on the hot line during dinner service. She'd bump my hip when she needed to pass behind me, a wordless choreography. Reggie held court at the pastry station, piping buttercream roses and telling stories about his twin daughters back home. On the 3rd night, I was smoking a cigarette on the crew deck, a narrow outdoor walkway on deck 3 that passengers never saw, when I noticed the helicopter. It was military. That much was obvious even to me. It came from the north, flying low and fast, no lights except a sharp red pulse on its belly. It passed directly over the Celestine without slowing, heading south toward open water. I watched it disappear and felt something cold settle in my chest that I couldn't name. The next morning, the captain made an announcement. He had a measured British accent that probably reassured most people. He said the ship would be adjusting its itinerary. Our first port of call, Nassau, was being skipped due to what he described as Port Authority scheduling conflicts. We'd proceed directly to our second stop, St. Thomas, arriving 2 days later than planned. The passengers murmured. Some complained to guest services. Most shrugged and ordered another drink. I found Reggie in the crew mess that afternoon. He was on his phone, scrolling, his face tight. "You seeing this?" he said, turning the screen toward me. The headlines were fragmented, confusing. Something about a quarantine in Jacksonville, a state of emergency in 3 Florida counties, a video clip, blurry, shaking, of National Guard vehicles blocking an interstate overpass. "What is that?" I asked. "I don't know," Reggie said, "but they shut the port." Nassau didn't have a scheduling conflict. They shut the whole port. Daria appeared behind us, holding a coffee. She looked at the screen, then at our faces. "Is problem?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. That was the last honest answer I gave for a long time. Because after that, everything I said to anyone was either a guess, a lie, or a prayer dressed up as confidence. And the distance between those three things kept getting smaller. By the fourth evening, the ship's Wi-Fi collapsed. For more new and exciting zombie stories, subscribe to the channel now and click the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Not slowly, not a gradual degradation. It vanished. One moment, Reggie was refreshing a news page in the crew mess. The next, every device on the ship returned the same dead signal. Within an hour, the passenger decks erupted into the particular breed of outrage that only the comfortable can muster. I watched a man in a linen shirt scream at a 20-year-old guest services agent because he couldn't post a sunset photo. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding. I would have found it funny if I hadn't been so afraid. The captain made a second announcement that evening. Technical difficulties with the satellite uplink. Engineers were working on it. He encouraged passengers to enjoy the onboard entertainment. The jazz trio in the starboard lounge was performing at 9. The casino was offering double reward points. Nobody was buying it anymore. I found Daria on the crew deck that night. She was leaning against the railing, staring at the ocean. The water was black and flat, like oil. "My mother is in Jacksonville," she said quietly. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if Jacksonville still existed in any form her mother would recognize. "She's tough," I offered. Daria looked at me with those sharp gray eyes. "You don't know her." "No," I admitted. "I don't." She turned back to the water. "I don't know her either. Not really. We talk maybe twice a year. She moved there for a man, a stupid man." She paused. "But she is my mother." We stood in silence. Below us, the hull pushed through dark water with a low, continuous hiss. The next morning, day 5, Dr. Ansel Brandt appeared. Brandt was the ship's chief medical officer, a tall, angular German man with steel-rimmed glasses and the bedside manner of a filing cabinet. I'd seen him once in the crew medical bay when I'd burned my wrist on a sauté pan. He dressed it without speaking, handed me ibuprofen, and pointed at the door. But that morning, he came to the galley. He walked directly to the head chef, a Frenchman named Lucien, and spoke to him in low, rapid tones. Lucien's face changed. He set down his knife, wiped his hands on his apron, and followed Brandt out without a word. Lucien didn't come back for 3 hours. When he did, he gathered the senior kitchen staff. "There is a medical situation," he said carefully. "Several passengers have presented with high fever and disorientation. Dr. Brandt has quarantined them in the medical center. As a precaution, we are implementing enhanced hygiene protocols. Gloves at all times. No direct food handling without barriers. Report any symptoms immediately." "What kind of symptoms?" Reggie asked. Lucien hesitated. "Fever, confusion, aggression." "Aggression?" "That is what I was told." Reggie looked at me. I looked at Daria. She was already pulling on a fresh pair of gloves, her face unreadable. I should have pressed harder. I should have gone to the medical center myself and demanded answers. But I did what everyone on that ship was doing. I folded the fear into a smaller shape and tucked it somewhere I didn't have to look at it. That night during second dinner service, we heard the screaming. It came from above us, somewhere on deck 7. The main dining level, a sound that started as a single voice and multiplied. Not the screaming of surprise or anger. This was the screaming of people who had just seen something their minds couldn't organize into meaning. The kitchen went still. Every burner, every timer, every clattering pan. Silenced by a collective animal recognition that something fundamental had broken. Then the ship's emergency alarm triggered. A repeating tone, low and mechanical, accompanied by a recorded voice. Attention all passengers and crew. Please return to your cabins immediately. This is not a drill. Return to your cabins and lock your doors. Daria grabbed my arm. Her grip was iron. Joel, she said, we go now. Reggie was already moving toward the crew corridor. I dropped the pan I was holding. I remember hearing it ring against the floor, a clean metallic note that had no business sounding so ordinary in a moment that was anything but. We ran. The crew corridors of the Celestine were a parallel world. Narrow, fluorescent-lit, linoleum-floored passages that threaded through the ship's body like veins. No chandeliers, no brass. Just pipes, conduit, and doors marked with codes that meant nothing to passengers and everything to us. Reggie led. He'd worked cruise ships before. 2 years on a Carnival vessel, he'd told me. And he moved through the corridors with a confidence that Daria and I clung to. We descended from deck 5 to deck 3, then cut aft through a service passage that ran behind the laundry facility. The alarm was still sounding. That repeating tone bored into my skull like a drill bit. Where are we going? I asked. Crew quarters, Reggie said. My cabin's on deck 2, aft section, interior. One way in, one way out. We get inside, we lock it, we wait. Wait for what? He didn't answer. We passed 2 other crew members in the corridor. A young Filipino woman from housekeeping whose name tag read Maribel, and an Indonesian man in an engineering jumpsuit. They were moving fast in the opposite direction, toward the bow. Don't go up, Reggie called to them. Stay below. Maribel slowed. Her eyes were wide. They said to go to muster stations. Don't, Reggie said with a firmness that stopped her. Not yet. Stay below. Find a room you can lock. The engineer grabbed Maribel's elbow and pulled her forward. They disappeared around a corner, and I never saw either of them again. Reggie's cabin was small, a single bed, a narrow desk, a closet barely wide enough for a uniform. The 3 of us filled it completely. He locked the door, then dragged the desk against it. Daria sat on the bed. I stood with my back against the far wall, which was exactly 4 feet from the door. Okay, I said. What the hell is happening? You saw the news, Reggie said, before the Wi-Fi went down. Quarantine, National Guard. That doesn't explain screaming on a cruise ship. Doesn't it? The question sat between us like a grenade. Daria spoke. The passengers in medical. Fever, aggression. This is what was happening in Florida, yes? None of us wanted to say the word. It felt absurd. It felt like something that belonged on a screen, in fiction, in someone else's catastrophe. But the screaming above us had been real, and the alarm was still cycling its mechanical heartbeat through the walls. And we were locked in a room the size of a parking space in the middle of the ocean. We need information, I said. We can't just sit here. We can for tonight, Reggie said. Tomorrow, when things calm down, we figure out what's real and what's panic. Things did not calm down. Over the next 3 hours, the sounds above us evolved. The screaming faded, replaced by something worse, running. Hundreds of feet on hard flooring, a stampede rhythm that vibrated through the ceiling. Doors slamming, glass breaking in muffled, distant crashes. And underneath all of it, a sound I couldn't identify at first. A low, wet vocalization. Not speech, not quite moaning. Something between a growl and a gargle, like a throat producing sound, without a mind directing it. Daria heard it too. She pressed her ear to the wall and closed her eyes. "There is someone in the next cabin," she whispered. We listened. Through the thin steel partition, we could hear breathing, ragged, arrhythmic. And then a thud. Someone, hitting the wall from the other side. Not knocking, not trying to communicate, just impact. Repeated, metronomic impact, as if a body were swaying and colliding with the surface without awareness. Thud, thud, thud. Reggie turned off the light. We sat in darkness, listening to that rhythm, and nobody spoke. I could hear Daria's breathing, controlled and deliberate. I could hear Reggie shifting his weight. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, keeping imperfect time with the thing on the other side of the wall. I didn't sleep. I don't think any of us did. We just sat there in the dark, in a metal box, on a floating city, and waited for the world to tell us what it had become. Morning announced itself not with light. There were no windows, but with silence. The alarm had stopped. The running had stopped. The thing in the next cabin had stopped its rhythmic collision sometime around what I guessed was 3 a.m. The absence of sound was somehow more disturbing than the noise had been, because noise at least told you where the danger was. Reggie cracked the door. The corridor was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed their indifferent hum. Nothing moved. "I'm going to check the crew mess," he said. "See if anyone's organized." "I'll come with you," I said. "No." He held up a hand. "Someone stays with the room. If this is our fallback, we don't lose it." He looked at Daria. She nodded. 20 minutes, she said. "Then we come looking." Reggie slipped out. I watched the corridor swallow him. Daria and I sat in silence for 11 minutes. I know because I was counting seconds in my head. A compulsive rhythm that kept the fear from expanding to fill all available space. Then Daria said, "I worked on fishing boat in Kamchatka when I was 19. I looked at her. "My uncle's boat. 4 months, Bering Sea." She examined her hands. "There was a storm, 3 days. The boat was 40 meters. The waves were bigger. We lost 2 men. I'm sorry. I am telling you because of what I learned. On the water, fear is a tax. You pay it and keep working, or you pay it and drown. There is no third option." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Fast. Reggie appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, and he wasn't alone. Behind him was a woman I recognized. Catalina Moro, one of the ship's entertainment coordinators. I'd seen her managing the pool deck activities, always smiling, always moving. She wasn't smiling now. Her dark hair was pulled back in a knot, and there was blood on her polo shirt. Not a lot. A smear across the chest, as if she'd pressed against something wet. "Tell them," Reggie said, closing the door. Catalina sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. "The medical center is gone," she said. "Overrun. The quarantined passengers. They turned. I don't know how else to say it. They attacked the medical staff. And then the medical staff turned. It spread to Deck 7 during dinner because someone who'd been bitten walked into the main dining room before showing symptoms." "How many?" I asked. "I don't know. Hundreds by now. Maybe more. It moves fast. A bite, and within an hour, they're gone. Fever, then seizure. Then they stop being who they were." "Where's security?" Daria's it. Security tried to establish a perimeter on Deck 8. They had the stairwells blocked, fire doors sealed. It held for maybe 2 hours. Then someone on the inside turned. One of the officers, already bitten, hadn't told anyone. And the perimeter collapsed from within. The room contracted around me. I could feel the ship's mass in a way I hadn't before. All 114,000 tons of it. No longer a vessel of leisure, but a cage. The bridge, Reggie asked. Locked down. Captain Hargrove sealed it after the first breach. He made one more announcement around midnight. Did you hear it? We hadn't. He said help was coming. Coast Guard, military. He said to stay in your rooms. And you believe that? Darius asked. Catalina looked at her. I believe he believes it. Whether anyone's coming, I don't know. The satellite systems are down. I don't know if he even made contact. I leaned against the wall and tried to think clearly. The problem wasn't just the infected. The problem was the architecture of the situation. A cruise ship is a closed system. Air circulation is shared. Water is shared. Corridors are finite. Every deck connects to every other deck through stairwells and elevator shafts. You can seal doors, but you can't seal a ship from itself. Want more intense zombie stories? Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We need to go lower, I said, below the passenger decks, engine rooms, storage, areas the passengers wouldn't reach. Reggie nodded slowly. Deck 1, Deck 0. The Orlop space is near the waterline. Can we get there from here? Daria asked. There's a service stairwell at the end of this corridor, Catalina said. It goes down to the tank top level. I looked at the three of them. Reggie, solid and steady. Daria, coiled and sharp. Catalina, terrified but functioning. Then we go down, I said. Now, before whatever's above us finds its way here. The service stairwell was a metal spiral that descended into the ship's gut. The air changed as we dropped below Deck 1, warmer, thicker, saturated with the smell of oil and bilge water and the deep mechanical throb of the engines. The Celestine's power plant was still running, which meant someone was still alive in engineering, or the automated systems were holding. We emerged on Deck 0, the lowest accessible level above the double bottom. The corridor here was industrial. Exposed pipes, cable trays overhead, waterproof doors with heavy lever handles. The lighting was yellow and sparse. Our footsteps echoed off bare steel. This way, Catalina said, leading us aft. She'd spent enough time exploring the crew areas during her 2 years aboard to know the layout. We found what we were looking for in a compartment marked Provision Stores. Dry goods. A large rectangular room lined with industrial shelving, stacked with canned food, rice, flour, cooking oil, bottled water, enough to feed the ship's kitchens for weeks. There was a single entrance, a heavy watertight door with a wheel latch that could be sealed from inside. This is good, Reggie said, running his hand along the door frame. Steel construction, no windows, one point of entry. We could hold this. Daria was already inventorying the shelves. Canned vegetables, canned fruit, dried pasta, cooking oil. No way to cook, but we can eat. Water for maybe 2 weeks if we're careful. There's no ventilation in here, Catalina noted. Just a single duct, it'll get stuffy. Stuffy beats dead, Reggie said. We made 3 trips back to Reggie's cabin and the adjacent crew rooms, collecting blankets, flashlights, a first aid kit, and, critically, a battery-operated radio that Catalina found in an emergency supply locker. The corridors remained empty on every trip, but on the second run, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The door to the cabin next to Reggie's, the one where we'd heard the thudding, was open. The room inside was empty. But the interior wall, the one we'd listened through, was smeared with dark fluid at shoulder height. A repeating pattern of impact marks, each one surrounded by a corona of what I refused to look at closely enough to identify. Whatever had been in there was now somewhere else. By midday, or what we estimated was midday, we had established our position in the dry stores. Reggie sealed the watertight door and spun the wheel until the latch engaged with a satisfying mechanical click. For the first time, In 18 hours, I exhaled fully. Catalina got the radio working. We cycled through frequencies, finding mostly static. Then, on a maritime emergency channel, a recorded loop. This is United States Coast Guard District 7 issuing a maritime advisory. All vessels in the Atlantic Basin are directed to maintain position and avoid port entry. Quarantine protocols are in effect for all eastern seaboard harbors. Repeat, all vessels maintain position. The message looped without variation. An automated broadcast. No live voice, no instructions for rescue. Maintain position, Daria repeated flatly. We are already maintaining position. We have no choice. At least they know ships are out here, Reggie said. Knowing and coming are different things, Catalina replied. She was right. But the broadcast confirmed something important. This wasn't isolated to the Celestine. Whatever was happening had reached a scale that warranted shutting down the entire eastern seaboard. The infection in Jacksonville, the military helicopter I'd seen. These weren't anomalies. They were early warnings we'd all been too comfortable to read. I sat on a case of canned tomatoes and tried to organize my thoughts. We had shelter, food, water, and a sealed position deep in the ship's hull. The infected, as far as we knew, were concentrated on the upper passenger decks. The crew decks might still hold survivors. We should find others, I said. There are almost 2,000 crew on this ship. Some of them made it, and some of them didn't, Daria said. How do we tell the difference before it's too late? The question hung in the recycled air of our steel box, unanswered, because the truth was we couldn't. Not with certainty. Not anymore. Trust had become a currency we couldn't afford to spend carelessly. And every interaction from this point forward carried a cost we might not survive paying. On the second day in the stores, day 7 since departure, by my rough count, we made contact with other survivors. It happened by accident. Reggie had gone to check the adjacent compartment, a mechanical space housing water treatment equipment, when he heard tapping on a pipe. Not random, rhythmic. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. A universal signal even without training. He tapped back. Within an hour, we had communication. On the other side of a bulkhead partition, in a refrigeration machinery room, a group of 7 crew members had established their own refuge. They'd entered from a different service stairwell and had been sealed in since the first night. Their group included 2 engineers, Henrik Jansson from Denmark and Paulo Reyes from the Philippines, a bartender named Suki Tanaka, 3 housekeeping staff whose names I'd learn later, and the ship's deputy cruise director, a British man named Oliver Marsh. We opened a connecting maintenance hatch and merged our spaces. The relief was physical. More people meant more hands, more knowledge, more capacity. Henrik and Paulo were invaluable. They understood the ship's systems, the power grid, the ventilation network, the bilge pumps. They could read the Celestine's body the way a doctor reads a patient. Oliver Marsh became our de facto organizer. He was in his 50s, lean, with the measured calm of someone who'd spent decades managing crises of the cruise ship variety. Norovirus outbreaks, passenger medical emergencies, tropical storm reroutings. This was categorically different, but his instinct for logistics transferred. We need to establish 3 things, Oliver said, standing in the center of our expanded space like he was chairing a staff meeting. Water supply security, communication capability, and perimeter awareness. Everything else is secondary. Henrik reported that the ship's desalination plant was still operational, running on the main engine's power. As long as the engines ran, we had fresh water. The water treatment room next door gave us direct access to a supply line. The engines are automated to a degree, Paolo added, but they need monitoring, fuel management, cooling systems, lubrication. Without engineering crew maintaining them, we have maybe 2-3 weeks before something critical fails. Then we need to reach the engine control room, I said. It's on deck 1, forward of amidships, Henrik said. Accessible from this level through a connecting passage. But we'd have to pass through the main crew corridor on deck 1, and we don't know what's there. This became our first tactical problem. We needed the engine room to ensure long-term survival, but reaching it meant exposure. The deck 1 crew corridor was a 100-meter stretch that connected the aft crew quarters to the forward engineering spaces. It had multiple access points from the decks above. Stairwells, elevator shafts, service ladders. Any of those could be compromised. We decided to send a scouting team. Reggie volunteered immediately. Henrik joined him. I insisted on going as the third. Daria pulled me aside before we left. You don't have to prove anything, she said. I'm not proving anything. I'm a spare set of eyes. You're a cook, Joel. So are you. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Yes. But I'm a cook who worked on a fishing boat in the Bering Sea. You're a cook who worked in a hotel in Fort Lauderdale. Then I'll stay behind you if it gets bad. She studied my face for a moment, then stepped back. Don't die. The three of us moved out through the maintenance hatch into the service passage. Henrik carried a heavy wrench. Reggie had a fire extinguisher, the old kind, solid steel, useful as a weapon if needed. I had a kitchen knife I'd taken from the galley during our initial escape. It felt absurd in my hand. A chef's knife as a survival tool. But it was 8 inches of forged steel with a handle I knew intimately. And there was a grim comfort in that. The passage was tight, warm, noisy with the thrum of machinery. We moved slowly, checking every junction, every door. The air tasted of diesel and copper. Henrik raised a hand. We stopped. Ahead, where the passage opened into the main deck 1 crew corridor, a figure stood motionless under a flickering fluorescent tube. Its back was to us. It wore a white officer's uniform now dark with stains. Its head hung at an angle that suggested the muscles of the neck had abandoned their function. We pressed ourselves against the wall. Nobody breathed. The figure swayed. A subtle oscillation, like a plant in a current. No awareness, no purpose. Just a body operating on whatever residual impulse the infection left behind when it burned through everything that made a person a person. Henrik mouthed, "Go around." There was no way around. The passage funneled directly into the corridor where the thing stood. Reggie looked back at me, then at Henrik. He held up the fire extinguisher and made a gesture. "Stay here, I'll handle it." I shook my head. If this went wrong, we needed numbers. We approached together. 15 feet, 10. I could see details now. The officer's uniform was torn at the shoulder. One shoe was missing. The skin of his exposed hand was mottled, threaded with dark veins visible even in the poor light. And the sound? Up close, I could hear it breathing. That wet, gurgling respiration, as if the lungs were filling with something that wasn't air. At 5 feet, the fluorescent tube above us buzzed louder, flickered, and popped into full brightness. The figure turned. Its face was a ruin. Not from violence, from transformation. The skin had tightened, pulling the features into a mask of wrong geometry. The eyes were open but unfocused, pupils blown wide, reflecting the light like an animal's. The mouth moved in a continuous, silent articulation. As if trying to form words, it no longer had the architecture to produce. It saw us, or registered us. Whatever sensory mechanism remained locked onto our presence, with a precision that felt obscene in something so degraded. Reggie moved first. The fire extinguisher connected with the side of its head with a sound I will carry in my memory for however long I have left. The thing crumpled sideways, hit the wall and slid to the floor. It didn't stay down. It reached for Reggie's ankle with fingers that moved in jerking, mechanical spasms. Henrik brought the wrench down. Once, the reaching stopped. We stood over it, breathing hard. The corridor hummed around us as if nothing had happened. "Move," Reggie said. The engine control room was 50 meters further forward. We covered the distance in a state of focused terror, checking every shadow, every doorway. We encountered 2 more infected along the route. Both appeared dormant, standing in alcoves like mannequins in a display. We gave them wide berth. They didn't react. Henrik theorized quietly as we moved. Reduced stimuli, they go passive. They seem to respond primarily to sound and movement. In low stimulus environments, they idle. Idle, I repeated. Like a machine. Yes. His voice was clinical, but his hands were shaking. Like a machine. The engine control room was sealed. Henrik entered a code on the keypad beside the door, his engineering credentials still active in the system. And the lock disengaged with a pneumatic sigh. Inside was a cathedral of functionality. Banks of monitors, most still active, displayed the Celestine's vital systems in green and amber readouts. The main engines were running at reduced power, enough to maintain electrical generation and basic systems, not enough for propulsion. The ship was drifting. "Someone set this before they left," Henrik said, scanning the displays. "Or before they couldn't leave anymore. They put the engines in safe mode, automated monitoring. It'll run like this for a while, but not forever." "Can you manage it from here?" Reggie asked. "I can manage it from here. Then we need to secure this space and the route back to stores." We spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that. We sealed every access point along the Deck 1 passage between the engine control room and our provision store. Fire doors, watertight doors, maintenance hatches, anything with a latch or lock. We created a sealed corridor, a tunnel of safety through the ship's lower body. When we returned, Oliver had organized the group. Rationing protocols, sleep schedules, hygiene procedures using the water supply line. A simple signal system, 3 taps for all clear, rapid tapping for danger. That night, sitting in the warm, cramped space of our refuge, I ate canned peaches with a plastic spoon and listened to the ship groan around us. Henrik was already planning modifications to the engine systems. Reggie was reinforcing the door. Daria sat beside me, her shoulder touching mine. "Not dead," she said. "Not dead," I confirmed. It felt briefly like enough. The illusion of stability lasted 2 days. On what I estimated was day 9, Suki Tanaka came to me with information that restructured everything. She'd been monitoring the radio, cycling through frequencies with the patience of someone who understood that silence was data too. Most channels returned nothing. The Coast Guard loop continued its hollow automation, but she'd found something new. "Channel 16, she said. "Maritime distress frequency. There's a voice." I followed her to where we'd set up the radio on a shelf between canned beans and industrial-sized bags of rice. She adjusted the dial with careful fingers. Static. Then, fading in and out like a signal fighting for survival, a voice. "This is the container vessel Atlantic Pioneer. Position approximately 27 north, 65 west. We have 112 survivors aboard. We are requesting." Static consumed the rest. Then it returned. "No infected. Repeat, no infected aboard. We are requesting rendezvous with any vessel carrying survivors. We have fuel for approximately 6 days. If anyone can hear this." The transmission looped. A recorded message, broadcast on repeat. a digital hand waving in the dark. 27 north, 65 west, Henrik said when I told him. That's roughly 300 nautical miles northeast of us, a container ship. With survivors, Catalina said. No infected. The implication rippled through our group. Another ship, clean, with fuel, potentially with communication equipment more powerful than our battery radio. A lifeboat, in the truest sense. We can't reach them, Oliver said. We have no propulsion. The engines are in safe mode generating power, not driving the ship. I can change that, Henrik said. Paolo and I can restore propulsion. The systems are intact, but it would mean committing our fuel reserves to movement. If we start sailing and don't find them, or they've moved, we burn fuel we can't replace. And steering? Reggie asked. Who drives a cruise ship? The bridge, Henrik said. Navigation, helm control. It's all on the bridge. The bridge. Sealed since day 3. Captain Hargrove and whoever was with him, locked behind reinforced doors on deck 14. The highest point of the ship, accessible only through the upper decks where the infection had been most devastating. Nobody spoke for a long moment. We'd have to go up, Daria said. The words landed like stones in still water. Going up meant leaving our sealed corridor. It meant ascending through decks we'd deliberately abandoned. It meant passing through the grand atrium, the passenger corridors, the entertainment venues, all the gilded spaces that had become something unspeakable. We could stay here, Oliver said. We have food, water, power. We could wait for rescue. What rescue? Catalina's voice was sharp. The Coast Guard broadcast is automated. Nobody's coming. The entire coastline is quarantined. We wait here, we wait until the engines fail, then we drift until the food runs out. And then we die in the dark. The division was immediate and fundamental. Oliver, Suki, and 2 of the housekeeping staff, a married couple named June and Leanne, wanted to stay. Their logic was defensive. We had a secure position. The risks of moving were catastrophic, and the Atlantic Pioneer might be gone before we could reach it. Reggie, Daria, Henrik, Paolo, Catalina, and I wanted to try. Our logic was offensive. Staying was slow death. The Pioneer represented a genuine chance, and reaching the bridge was a defined objective, with a concrete reward. The third housekeeper, a quiet young man from Myanmar named Tyne, listened to both sides and said nothing. That night, the argument continued in lower tones. Not hostile, not yet, but charged with the particular electricity of people who understand that disagreement on survival strategy isn't philosophical. It's existential. Choosing wrong means dying wrong, and the weight of that collapses the space for compromise. I sat apart from it, turning a can of peaches in my hands, thinking about the architecture of the ship above me. 14 decks, thousands of infected, and somewhere at the top, a sealed bridge that might as well have been on the moon. But the voice on the radio kept broadcasting, and the container ship kept drifting, and the window for reaching it kept narrowing. Every hour of debate was an hour of fuel the Pioneer was burning. An hour closer to the moment when that signal would stop, and the last chance would evaporate into Atlantic static. We left the next morning. 6 of us. Oliver shook my hand at the door to the provisions store. His grip was firm, his expression complicated. If you reach the bridge, radio down to us on the internal system, he said. Channel 4, we'll be listening. We will. And Joel? He paused. If you can't reach it, come back. Don't be proud about it. Just come back. I nodded. Daria was already in the corridor, the kitchen knife I'd given her held low against her thigh. Reggie had the fire extinguisher. Henrik and Paolo carried tools, wrenches, pry bars, a heavy-duty flashlight that could double as a club. Catalina had the radio, wrapped in a towel and secured in a backpack. We'd planned the route the night before, using Henrik's knowledge of the ship's layout. The safest path upward was through the service stairwells, narrow, enclosed, with fire doors at every level that could be sealed behind us. We descend from deck 1 to deck 14, 13 levels, clearing each landing before proceeding. The first 3 decks were quiet. The crew levels, decks 1 through 3, had been largely emptied during the initial evacuation. We found evidence of flight, dropped belongings, overturned carts, a single shoe on a landing, but no infected. Deck 4 was the transition. Above this line, the ship became passenger territory, and the character of the space changed. The service stairwell opened onto a corridor that ran parallel to the Deck 4 promenade, along a windowed walkway that circled the ship's exterior. Through the glass, I could see daylight for the first time in days. The ocean was gray-blue and empty to every horizon. The sky was overcast. The world outside the ship looked indifferent to what was happening inside it. Paolo spotted the first group. Through a glass partition separating the service corridor from a passenger lounge, we could see them, dozens. Standing, sitting, some lying on the floor. They occupied the lounge like a grotesque parody of leisure. Bodies in chairs, slumped over tables, pressed against walls. Most were motionless. A few exhibited that slow, aimless sway Henrik had described. Dormant, Henrik whispered. Keep quiet, keep moving. We passed the partition in silence, each footstep placed with surgical intention. The carpet of the service corridor absorbed our weight. I watched the infected through the glass as we moved. One of them, a woman in a sundress, her hair matted, her bare feet blackened, turned her head slowly as we passed. Not toward us, just turning, as if responding to some internal signal. Then she stopped and was still again. My heartbeat was deafening in my own ears. Deck 7 was worse. This had been the main entertainment level, the grand atrium, the dining rooms, the theater. The service corridor here ran behind the atrium's back wall, and through a maintenance access panel that had been left ajar, we could see into the 5-story space. The atrium was full. Hundreds of them. The chandeliers still hung overhead, some still lit, casting a warm golden light over a scene that defied the beauty of the illumination. They stood in clusters and alone, filling the marble floor, the mezzanine levels, the grand staircase. The glass elevators were stopped at various floors, some with figures visible inside, pressed against the doors. The air that leaked through the open panel was thick and sweet and wrong. Catalina covered her mouth. Paolo closed the panel slowly, carefully, and we moved on. Between decks 9 and 10, we encountered a blocked stairwell. A fire door had been sealed from the other side. Someone had jammed a metal rod through the handle mechanism. We couldn't open it without noise. Alternate route, Henrik said, consulting his mental map. There's a second service stairwell, starboard side. We'd have to cross through a passenger corridor to reach it. How long? Reggie asked. 30 meters, maybe 40. 30 meters of exposed corridor on a deck we couldn't assess. Daria looked at me. No choice, she said. She was right. The only way forward was through. Henrik found the access door, checked the corridor through a narrow viewport, and held up 4 fingers. 4 infected, visible, all standing, all dormant. Reggie took point. Daria followed. I went third with Henrik and Paolo behind me, and Catalina at the rear. We entered the passenger corridor on deck 9, and the ship's gilded world closed around us like a jaw. The corridor was wide and carpeted in deep burgundy. Wall sconces cast pools of amber light at regular intervals. Framed photographs of Caribbean ports lined the walls. Turquoise water, white sand, palm trees. A brochure rack near a closed gift shop still held glossy pamphlets advertising shore excursions to places that might no longer exist. The 4 infected stood at varying distances along the 50-meter stretch we needed to cross. The nearest was 10 feet from our access door. An elderly man in a bathrobe, standing with his arms at his sides, head tilted toward the ceiling. The furthest was near the far end. A crew member in a soiled white uniform, leaning against the wall at an angle that suggested the legs were failing, but the body hadn't gotten the message. We moved. The carpet was our ally. It swallowed every footfall. We passed the elderly man close enough that I could see the pattern on his bathrobe. Small blue anchors on white terry cloth. His eyes were open, filmed over, staring at nothing. His mouth worked silently. Up close, the smell was overwhelming. Not decay exactly, but something biological and alien. The scent of a body running chemistry that bore no relation to human metabolism. 20 meters in, Catalina's backpack caught on a door handle. The sound was small, a scrape of fabric against brass. But in the silence, it was a gunshot. The crew member at the far end of the corridor snapped upright. Its head swiveled toward us with mechanical precision, and a sound emerged from its throat. That wet, oscillating growl. And then it was moving, not running. A fast, jerking walk, like a marionette operated by someone who'd only been told what walking looked like. But it was covering ground. "Go," Reggie said. We abandoned stealth. The 30 remaining meters became a sprint. Behind us, the elderly man in the bathrobe animated, lurching into motion with a speed that contradicted his age and frailty. The other 2 responded to the commotion, a chain reaction of awakening that rippled through the corridor. Henrik reached the starboard stairwell door first. He hauled it open. We poured through. Paolo slammed it shut and threw the latch. Something hit the other side, a body, then another, and the door shuddered in its frame. "Up," Reggie ordered. "Don't stop." We climbed. My legs burned. The stairwell echoed with our breathing, our footsteps, and beneath it the distant percussion of fists on steel from the corridor below. Deck 10, Deck 11, Deck 12. On the landing between 12 and 13, Paolo stopped. He was clutching his left hand against his chest, his face gray. "What's wrong?" Henrik asked. Paolo opened his hand. Across his palm was a gash, deep, ragged, bleeding freely. He must have caught it on exposed metal during our scramble through the stairwell door. "It's a cut," he said. "Just a cut." But the way Henrik looked at it, the way everyone looked at it, carried a weight far beyond the wound itself. Because we didn't know. We didn't know if the infection required a bite, or if contact with contaminated surfaces was enough. We didn't know if the blood was the vector, or saliva, or air. We didn't know anything, except that people turned, and the world ended, and now one of us was bleeding from an unexplained wound in a stairwell surrounded by the infected. "It was the door," Catalina said. "The latch had a rough edge. I saw it." "You're sure?" Dario asked. "I'm sure." Paolo looked at us, looking at him. And I watched something die in his eyes. Not fear. Recognition. The recognition that from this moment forward, he was suspect. That every cough, every stumble, every moment of fatigue would be scrutinized. That he'd crossed an invisible line from one of us to potentially one of them. "I'll wrap it," he said quietly. "Let's keep moving." Henrik bandaged the wound with strips torn from a curtain we found on the Deck 12 landing. Nobody spoke during the process, The silence was thicker than any sound the infected had made. We climbed the final 2 levels to Deck 14 in a formation that had subtly reorganized itself. Paolo was no longer in the center of the group. He was at the back, and the distance between him and the rest of us was 6 inches wider than it had been before. I noticed. He noticed me noticing. Neither of us said anything. Deck 14 was the ship's crown. The bridge occupied the forward section, a wide, curved space of reinforced glass and steel that jutted out over the bow. Behind it, a short corridor led to the captain's quarters and the senior officer's suite. The entire level was designed with a different aesthetic than the passenger decks below. Functional, authoritative, with none of the gilded pretension. The corridor to the bridge was clear, disturbingly so. No infected, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just clean carpet and closed doors and the hum of climate control. Hargrove sealed this level tight, Catalina murmured. He must have secured it before things got bad. The bridge door was a reinforced steel barrier with an electronic lock and an intercom panel. Henrik pressed the call button. Static. Then a voice. Tired, British, precise. Identify yourselves. Henrik Janssen, engineering. I have 5 crew members with me. We've come up from Deck 0. A long pause. Then, how many infected did you encounter? Several, none in our group. We're clean. Another pause. I could almost hear the calculation happening on the other side of that door. Trust was arithmetic now. Probability and consequence measured against desperation. The lock disengaged. The door swung inward. Captain Adrian Hargrove stood behind a navigation console in a uniform that had been worn continuously for a week. He was tall, silver-haired, distinguished in the way that cruise line captains are contractually required to be. But his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a man who had watched his command become a coffin and had spent every moment since trying to calculate a way out of the math. He wasn't alone. With him were 3 people. His first officer, a woman named Commander Diane Osei, a navigation officer named Torres, and a security officer named Bryce, who pointed a flare gun at us as we entered. Lower it, Hargrove said. Bryce complied, reluctantly. Captain, Henrik said, the engines are in safe mode. I can restore propulsion from the engine control room. We've detected a transmission from a container vessel, the Atlantic Pioneer, 300 nautical miles northeast. They have survivors, no infected. They're requesting rendezvous. Hargrove absorbed this without visible reaction. Commander Osei leaned forward. You have a route back to engineering? She asked. A secured corridor on Deck 1, I said, sealed at both ends. The main question is navigation, Henrik continued. We need the bridge operational to steer. Are your systems functional? Torres answered. GPS is intermittent. Radar works. Helm control is operational, but we've been holding position on stabilizers. If you give me propulsion, I can plot a course. For the first time in days, something resembling hope circulated in the room. A plan, a destination, a sequence of actions that led somewhere other than waiting in the dark. Then Hargrove spoke, and the hope condensed into something more complicated. Before we discuss departure, he said, you should know what's happening on this ship. He turned to a bank of security monitors behind the navigation station. Most were dark, cameras destroyed or power interrupted, but perhaps a third still functioned, displaying grainy feeds from various decks. The images were a catalog of what human spaces become when humans vacate them. The pool deck, bodies floating in green water. The theater, rows of infected sitting in seats as if waiting for a performance that would never begin. The main corridor of Deck 8, choked with figures standing shoulder to shoulder, a solid mass of transformed humanity filling the passage from wall to wall. "My best estimate," Hargrove said, "is that approximately 90% of the people aboard this ship have turned. That's roughly 5,500 infected within these walls. The remaining 10%, perhaps 500 souls, are either hiding, dead from causes other than infection, or have gone overboard. We've had reports of people jumping. The number settled over us like a physical weight. 5,500. In the corridors beneath us, in the cabins around us, in every gilded space of this floating palace. We've been waiting for rescue that isn't coming," Hargrove said. "If you're telling me there's an alternative, I'm prepared to take it. But you need to understand what we're sailing through to get there." The plan took shape over the next 4 hours, drawn in grease pencil on a nautical chart that Torres spread across the navigation table. The mechanics were straightforward. Henrik and Paolo would return to the engine control room through our secured Deck 1 corridor and restore propulsion. Torres would plot a course from the bridge. We'd sail northeast at moderate speed, conserving fuel, and attempt to make contact with the Atlantic Pioneer by radio as we closed the distance. The complications were everything else. Restoring propulsion meant Henrik and Paolo needed to be in the engine room, 13 decks below the bridge, with no rapid communication system between them. The ship's internal phone network was partially operational. Henrik estimated 40% of the handsets still functioned, but we'd need to test the lines between engineering and the bridge. "I'm going back down with them," I told Hargrove. "Our other survivors are on Deck 0. They need to know what's happening." "I'll stay here," Catalina said. "I can operate the radio, help coordinate." "And the route between here and Deck 1? Hargrove asked. "We cleared it on the way up," Reggie said. "But clearing isn't holding. Those stairwells could be compromised by the time we go back through." Commander Osei stepped in. "Bryce and I will escort the return team to Deck 4. That's as far as we can commit bridge personnel." Daria, who had been studying the security monitors with an intensity that bordered on meditative, turned to the group. "The ones in the atrium," she said. "On the monitors. They're not moving randomly. Watch." We gathered around the screen showing the grand atrium. She was right. The infected below weren't wandering aimlessly. They moved in slow, circular patterns, like a current in a tide pool. Clusters would form, drift apart, reform elsewhere. There was a fluidity to it that suggested collective behavior. "They're responding to each other," Henrik said. "Some kind of group dynamic, stimulus response chains." "It means they're not static," Daria continued. "Their density shifts. Right now, the port side stairwells are relatively clear because the main mass has drifted starboard. If we go now, we use that window." It was the first time anyone had proposed using the infected's behavior as a tactical asset. Daria's Bering Sea pragmatism was manifesting. She was reading the infected the way a fisher reads a current. Not with fear, with calculation. We moved within the hour. Bryce and Osei led us down from Deck 14 to the Deck 9 transfer point. Bryce moved with the compact efficiency of someone trained for physical confrontation. The flare gun replaced now with a fire axe from an emergency station. Osei carried herself with an authority that made the narrow stairwells feel less like death traps and more like controlled environments. At Deck 9, we crossed the passenger corridor again. Daria's prediction held. The port side route was clear. The infected had migrated, drawn by whatever invisible signal governed their collective drift. We crossed in silence and reached the aft stairwell without contact. Osei and Bryce turned back at Deck 4. Osei gripped my forearm. "Get to engineering. Get those engines running. We'll be ready on the bridge." Yes, ma'am. She almost smiled. I haven't been called ma'am by a sous chef before. We descended the remaining decks to our sealed corridor on deck 1. The watertight doors were intact, the passage clear. When we reached the provision store, Oliver was waiting on the other side of the door with a wrench raised over his head. "It's us," Reggie said through the steel. Oliver opened the door. His face collapsed with relief when he saw all 6 of us, alive, unbitten. "We reached the bridge," I said. "We have a plan," I explained. Oliver listened. June and Leon listened. Then the quiet housekeeper listened with his hands clasped between his knees. Suki monitored the radio, her ear pressed to the speaker, still searching for the pioneer's signal. When I finished, Oliver was quiet for a long time. "So we sail this ship," he said, "through open ocean, with 5,500 infected below decks, to find a container vessel that may or may not still be where it says it is." "Yes," I said. "Then we'd better get started," he said, "because hope with a deadline is just a different kind of clock." Henrik and Paolo disappeared into the engine control room, and for 3 hours, the rest of us waited in the kind of silence that accumulates weight with every passing minute. Then the ship shuddered. It was subtle, a vibration that traveled up through the deck plates and into the soles of our feet, different from the steady hum of the generators. This was directional, purposeful. The Celestine was moving. Suki let out a breath she'd been holding for what seemed like days. June put his arm around Leon. Even Oliver, whose skepticism had been a structural feature of his personality since we'd met him, allowed himself a small nod. I picked up the internal phone handset mounted on the wall of the provision store and dialed the bridge. It rang 4 times before Torres answered. "Engineering has restored propulsion," he said. "We're making 8 knots on a heading of 035. Estimated time to the Pioneer's last known position, 37 hours. Any radio contact?" "Not yet. Catalina is broadcasting on channel 16. We'll keep trying." 37 hours. A day and a half of sailing through open ocean with a floating necropolis beneath us. I hung up and relayed the information. "What do we do for 37 hours?" June asked. It was the most I'd heard him say since we'd met. "We maintain," Oliver said. "We keep our routine. We stay sharp." But routine, I discovered, is a fragile construct when the context surrounding it has gone insane. We ate canned food at intervals that approximated mealtimes. We slept in shifts on blankets laid over steel decking. We monitored the radio. We checked the sealed doors. And in the gaps between these activities, we existed in a suspended state that was neither rest nor readiness, but something in between. A permanent flinch. Daria and I took a watch shift together, sitting by the watertight door, listening for sounds from beyond our sealed corridor. "Tell me something ordinary," she said. "Ordinary? Before this, what did you do on a normal day?" I thought about it. The question felt archaeological, like being asked to describe the daily life of an ancient civilization. "I woke up at 5, I said. "Fed Otis, made coffee in a French press because I'm pretentious about coffee and nothing else. Drove to work, prepped for 4 hours. Worked the line for 8. Cleaned down, drove home. Watched something on my phone until I fell asleep." Sounds lonely. It was, I didn't notice. People don't. They fill loneliness with motion and call it a life. "What about you?" I asked. "I cooked. I sent money home. I went to a gym that smelled like feet. I talked to my mother twice a year and felt guilty the other 363 days." She paused. "I had a man, for a while, Ukrainian. He cooked too. We fought about everything: seasoning, temperature, knife technique. We fought about things that didn't matter because we couldn't talk about things that did. What happened? He went back to Odessa before the war. I didn't ask him to stay. She adjusted the knife in her hand, turning it slowly. I think about that now. All the things I didn't ask for. All the doors I didn't knock on because I was afraid of what might answer. In the distance, muffled by steel and sea, something howled. Not wind, not machinery. A sound produced by hundreds of throats simultaneously, a chorus of the transformed, reacting to some stimulus we couldn't perceive. It rose, sustained, and faded. Daria didn't flinch, neither did I. We'd passed the point where individual sounds of horror could move us. The fear had transformed too, from sharp spikes of panic into a low, continuous frequency, a baseline hum of dread that we'd learned to function over like tinnitus. When we get to the Pioneer, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is make a proper meal from scratch, something with heat and seasoning and intention. If they have a kitchen, it's a container ship. They'll have a galley. Then I will help you cook, she said, and we will fight about seasoning. I'd like that. She looked at me, and for one moment, in the amber light of our underground refuge, the world was just two people and a promise shaped like a meal. 22 hours into our voyage, Paolo collapsed. Henrik found him slumped against a console in the engine room, conscious but confused, his skin sheened with sweat. The cut on his hand had reddened, the edges inflamed, radiating heat. Henrik called the bridge. Torres called down to us. I picked up the handset and heard the words I'd been dreading since the stairwell on deck 12. Paolo has a fever. The provision store went silent. Every face turned toward me. I could see the calculation happening behind every pair of eyes. The same brutal arithmetic that had governed every interaction since the outbreak began. How high? I asked. Henrik estimates 102, maybe 103. He's lucid but deteriorating. Is it the infection or is it a wound infection? A regular one. Bacteria. We don't know. Henrik says the cut shows signs of standard bacterial infection, redness, swelling, pus. But the early symptoms of the other thing are identical. The ambiguity was worse than certainty. If Paolo was turning, he'd become a threat in the engine room, the one space we couldn't afford to lose. If he was simply sick from an infected wound, treating him was straightforward, but the cost of guessing wrong in either direction was catastrophic. Can Henrik manage the engines alone? I asked. For more fresh zombie stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. For a while. But if something goes wrong, a system fault, a mechanical failure, he'll need a second pair of hands. I'll go, I said. Reggie started to object. I stopped him. Henrik needs support. I'm not an engineer, but I can follow instructions. And someone needs to be there to make a judgment call about Paolo. What kind of judgment call? Oliver asked. His tone carried the weight of exactly what he meant. The kind where we keep him isolated and watch his symptoms. If it's bacterial, the fever breaks. If it's not... I didn't finish. I didn't need to. I traveled the sealed corridor alone. The watertight doors echoed behind me as I passed through each section, sealing them in sequence. The engine room was warm, loud, alive with the pulse of the ship's mechanical heart. Henrik was monitoring 4 displays simultaneously, his eyes moving between them with the practiced scan of a man who spoke fluent machine. Paolo was lying on a makeshift bed in the corner, blankets over cable coils, his breathing rapid and shallow. I knelt beside him, his eyes focused on me with effort. "Joel," he said, I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking you cut your hand on a door latch and it got infected because we're living in a steel box with no antibiotics. He almost laughed. That's the optimistic version. It's the one I'm going with until you prove me wrong. I found a first aid kit mounted on the engine room wall. It contained basic supplies: gauze, antiseptic, painkillers, and crucially, a small course of amoxicillin. Ship's emergency supplies. I cleaned Paolo's wound, applied fresh antiseptic, bandaged it properly, and gave him the first dose of antibiotics. Then I sat beside him and waited. Henrik and I worked in tandem through the night. He taught me to read the engine displays: temperature, pressure, RPM, fuel consumption. I learned which alarms required immediate action and which were advisory. The work was absorbing in a way I hadn't expected. And I understood for the first time why Henrik had chosen engineering. There was a language to it, a logic that didn't betray you, that behaved according to rules that couldn't be infected. At hour 28, Paolo's fever broke. He woke soaked in sweat, weak, disoriented, but lucid. The inflammation in his hand had begun to subside. The antibiotics were working. It was bacterial, just bacterial. Henrik sat down on the floor and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook once, a single, controlled tremor. And then he stood, adjusted his glasses, and returned to his monitors. I called the bridge. Paolo's fever is down. It's a wound infection. He's responding to antibiotics. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. Then Torres said, "Copy that. And Joel, we have the Pioneer on radar. 18 nautical miles. Catalina made radio contact 20 minutes ago. They're holding position for us." I closed my eyes. The engines thrummed beneath my feet, pushing us forward across dark water toward a point of light that might, against all probability, be real. We reached the Atlantic Pioneer at dawn on what I believe was day 11. She was massive and ugly and the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. A rust-streaked container vessel flying no flag, crewed by 47 merchant sailors and 65 survivors they'd pulled from lifeboats and smaller craft across the Atlantic. They brought us aboard by crane basket, 6 at a time, while the Celestine drifted behind us, her lights still burning, her deck still populated by the thousands who would never leave her. I didn't look back. I wanted to. I didn't. Daria and I found the galley that evening. It was small, industrial, stocked with canned goods and dried provisions that bore no resemblance to the Celestine's luxury pantries. We made rice and tinned vegetables with improvised seasoning: salt, pepper, a jar of dried chili flakes we found behind a coffee machine. We argued about the chili flakes. She wanted more. I wanted restraint. We compromised on too much. We sat on the deck and ate with plastic forks while the sun set over an ocean that didn't care about any of us. And for the first time in 11 days, I tasted something that wasn't survival. It tasted like the beginning of whatever comes next.